The thing I love about the sonatas by Domenico Scarlatti is that he wrote one for everybody. He wrote more than 500 of them, one in every color of the rainbow. We're going to delve into them today as we explore the music of Domenico and his father, Alessandro Scarlatti. I'm Virginia Eskin, and the subject that we're going to kick around today is one that's very near and dear to me. I grew up playing Scarlatti sonatas on the piano, and then as an adult, I was sent off to London, and I played some of them on a harpsichord. And as a kid, I always thought the harpsichord reminded me of when your feet go to sleep, all those sort of needles and pins, those feelings. And I didn't care for the harpsichord, but as you get older, you realize what an elegant instrument it is. And today we're going to do some little comparison between the two kinds of instruments, and we're going to learn where Domenico Scarlatti came from. He had a very famous father. But before we go back to the Papa, let's just do a little tiny comparison, because Bach, Johann Sebastian, was born in 1685, and it turns out our man, Domenico, was also born in the same year. And it seems to me an odd coincidence that Bach's first prelude from his Well-Tempered Clavier starts. And then the first sonata that Scarlatti writes. So to me, there's a definite linkage, and there's no evidence, though, to suggest that the two men ever met or even their paths crossed. Another problem in looking at his life is that he didn't keep any scrapbooks, there are no diaries, and very little information about how he lived his life, just that he was married twice and eventually successful. It's pretty hard to sort of put together a picture of his personal life. We get a picture of the life of a musician in that time, the Baroque time. So it turns out that Liszt had a great part in sort of rediscovering Scarlatti's keyboard music, and sometimes they think of Scarlatti as being the Liszt of the harpsichord, and other people say, no, he's the Chopin. But I like the idea that Liszt rediscovered the little gems and used to put them on his programs. It reminds us of the way Mendelssohn discovered some of Bach's compositions. So it's good when you have 100 years later a famous musician, famous for something else, helping a dead musician. Well, let's hear something by Alessandro Scarlatti. He's the elder composer. We're going to hear two movements from a Concerto Grosso, and that would have been the kind of music that Domenico heard and that people in that time heard. Here it is. was just a little taste of Alessandro Scarlatti's music, very elegant and poised, and it was played by the London Vivaldi Orchestra. Monica Huggett was the conductor. And he's born in 1660 in Palermo, and his parents sent him off to Rome to be properly taught at the age of 12. You really got an early start in those days. And he heard lots of opera in Rome, and he grows up and eventually has some wealthy patrons, including Queen Christina of Sweden. And he's composing and performing operas there in Rome, and he has church jobs. He's even becomes a maestro di cappella, which is like Bach, the Kapellmeister. But in 1684, at the age of 24, he moves to Naples. And there's a story that his sister was involved with a priest. But that's another story. We won't get into that. And once he leaves Naples, he seems to have more opportunities to compose operas, because back in Rome, the popes were not terribly fond of opera. It probably seemed sort of decadent. And the description of life in Naples is extraordinary. The fact that people really dressed up. It sounds like they were from an opera themselves. The people in the streets wore beautiful blouses with lots of gold shot through the materials. I mean, even common people, they would just wear their best clothing, whether they were fruit vendors or butchers. And the description of walking through the streets is very, very colorful. And I guess there would have been a lot of smells, good and bad. So it's a very ripe place. Let's hear another little selection from the Papa, Alessandro. This is Dove voli, o mio pensiero? Where are you flying, my thoughts? It's a beautiful little aria. Well, that was just a little bit of an aria by Alessandro Scarlatti, Dove voli, o mio pensiero. It was sung by Nancy Argenta with the Chandos Baroque players. Well, let's get now to the son, Domenico, because he's the great keyboardist, and most of the program today is going to sort of revolve around him. As I said before, he was born the same year as Bach, 1685. He's born when his papa is about 25, and he began composing in his early teens, as his father had done, and he was eventually hired as an organist and a composer to the Viceroy in Naples, where his father had been hired as the maestro di cappella. He's 17 when that happens, and you get the impression, reading in between the lines, that the father and the son were very strong-willed, and it's not that they fought, but probably looked at music differently, which is the way fathers and sons look at everything differently. And the father was hoping for a post with the Medici family, and that didn't work out. And there's a wonderful letter that Alessandro writes when he's sending his son off to job hunt, really. And here it is. It's written to a Medici, Fernando. This son of mine is an eagle whose wings are grown. He ought not to stay idle in the nest, and I should not hinder his flight. So that's a touching thing for the papa wants to help him spread his wings and fly, even though I'm sure he felt that he had a lot to share and to learn. And that's always the problem when you're an apprentice or you're the son of a well-known composer or anybody. You want to shove a lot of knowledge into your son or daughter's head, and sometimes they're not ready for it. So Domenico goes to Naples without his father because his father has left Naples before. He's also looking for work, and he does need to get out from underneath his father's wing. And he's composing operas like his father had done, and I don't think I've ever heard a Domenico Scarlatti opera. Maybe they're around. I'll have to look for that. And he moves to Rome in 1708, and he gets hired by the Queen Casimira of Poland. And he, too, becomes the Maestro di Cappella at the Vatican in 1713. So, if you ask me, he's got the world by the string. And he even gets to meet Handel. It was interesting that Handel was considered a far better organist, and Scarlatti was considered the best harpsichordist. And in about 1719, he resigns, and he seems to go underground. And my theory is that he had a wife, first wife with 5 kids, and then he has a second wife. And there are no records of what went on, but he was probably busy with those wives and those children. And then the next big thing that happens for him is that his path crosses the 10-year-old Infanta Maria Barbara. And she was the daughter of King John V of Portugal. And she eventually marries the Spanish crown prince, Fernando, and they live happily ever after. They don't have children, but they have music. And when she becomes queen in 1746, she makes sure that Scarlatti is appointed her Maestro di Camera. And he seems to have been happy composing these beautiful little 2-part sonatas for all these occasions. And we're going to look at this very nice one now in C major that's got kind of interesting elements. It reminds me of trumpets, Baroque trumpets. Anybody who's been to the Palio in Siena, when they have those huge horse parades, they have long, beautiful brass trumpets, and they hang long silk banners, and this little sonata makes me think of that. It starts off. Well, I deliberately did that because just to show you how it's innocent enough, but then it gets hard where it goes. And your hands are leaping around. The right hand's going up high. The left hand going down low. And then eventually it comes back. And then he does something that's very ect Domenico Scarlatti. It becomes instantly sad. And so almost in every little piece you have happy, sad, or you have sort of sunny and then cloudy. And it goes... So you've got lots of nice things to sort of pay attention to. And the other thing that happens is the way you hit the notes. You don't play Scarlatti sonatas in a very prissy way. Hardly. They're very visceral and reflects sort of the Spanish or the Neapolitan quality. You kind of jam the notes together. You accent on the note. You hear that? Instead of... That trivializes it when you do that. You're not supposed to just sort of mince and prince around and, be prissy. Not at all. These pieces have enormous vigor to them. So here's that same sonata played on a harpsichord. That was Igor Kipnis playing the Sonata in C Major, Kirkpatrick 159 by Domenico Scarlatti. And I was looking at the music, and it's interesting. Either he has a different edition than the one I do, but he added some notes, and he did some very interesting things on the harpsichord, which you wouldn't do on the piano. He sort of rolled some of the notes. He went... And the reason he does that is to make the sound last longer, because on a harpsichord you have instant decay. The mechanism is so different. Now, let's listen to some singing from the same period, and it has what I was talking about before, the accent on the note. But the singer sings right on the note. And it's very effective.
Quella città d'amore che ti strinse orgogliosa beltà. Che ti strinse orgogliosa bella. Celebrosa che sfida Stoccone, raggi pure quella città d'amore che ti strinse orgogliosa bella. Che ti strinse orgogliosa bella. Frangi pure quella città d'amore che ti strinse orgogliosa bella.
That was from the Farinelli movie. It was part of the soundtrack. And I just sort of love the way that ornamentation happens, because the melody is kind of stupid. It's... But when you add it accents it up. It's sort of like a beautiful piece of jewelry. If you had poor Maria Barbara's face, which was apparently very pockmarked because she'd had smallpox, I think you need all the trills and lace that you can lay your hands on. Now, the next sonata that I'd like you to hear is very, very poignant. She apparently was melancholic, and so was her king husband, Fernando. And even though they were happy with each other, I think they were bored. Too much money, too much leisure. And this little B minor sonata is so beautiful, and it's perfect. I can imagine her playing it because it's not terribly difficult. The only thing that's hard about it is where the left hand goes all the way from the bottom, way up to there. And even though on a harpsichord the keyboard is short, still you're traveling 2 whole octaves, and you've got to put your finger down in the right place. Otherwise it's... And that wouldn't do. Even if you're the queen, I don't think you can get away with that. And it has this poignant little melody. And hear it here on the harpsichord. I just wanted, we have a nice harpsichord here in the studio, and the thing that also happens when you play the harpsichord is that you have to move slowly. It's a little bit like the transition from an old-fashioned typewriter, where you had to really push the keys down, to an electric typewriter. And the thing that's fun about playing a harpsichord is that you can really feel that click of where the key goes down to what used to be a goose quill, plucking a piece of gut, the string. And even with the modern harpsichords, you can still feel that. When you ride down on the key bed, you go past that kind of, it's really like a little point of resistance. And it slows you up. So I want you to hear, this is a very beautiful version played by Maria Tipo of this B minor Scarlatti Sonata. Wasn't that poignant? I can just imagine the Maria Barbara Queen playing that for herself. And it had all the hallmarks, the sort of leaps, the left hand going over the right hand. And then it also had those pretty little repeated notes. And the way Maria Tipo envisions this little sonata was very romantic. She didn't keep to a strict tempo, and I think the purists would not like it. But I wanted you to hear a sort of a real Italian version of a sonata played very beautifully. And since there are about 545 of them, as I said before, there's one for every mood. There's one for every day in the year. They have enormous variety. Some are more difficult than the others. Some definitely tax even professional pianists, but most of them can be played by almost anybody. And they've been transcribed, and I'd like you to hear one that's been transposed for guitar. It's one in G major. That was Rachel Gauck playing a Scarlatti sonata on the guitar, and it had been transcribed by Carlos Barbosa Lima. I'm Virginia Eskin, and today on A Note to You, we're investigating the Scarlatti family. And if you have any comments, you can write to us. You can write it to us in Italian if you want. The address is A Note to You, care of WGBH Radio, 125 Western Avenue, Boston, Massachusetts, 02134. The email address is anotettoyou@wgbh.org. A Note to You is made possible by the friends and alumni of Northeastern University. So in our discussion today of Domenico Scarlatti, you do have to include this very strange chapter in musical history of castratos. And even though it was a barbarous mutilation of a man's reproductive organs, what had happened is they had young boys singing in church, and then when their voices changed at puberty, they weren't able to sing with that beautiful high quality anymore. And I don't know how it happened, but it must have been a terrible accident. They discovered that by doing this, that a man kept that very pure sound, and a whole school of castrato development sprang up, and there were dormitories, and it was a whole lifestyle, and it brought a lot of luster and prestige to your family. It was like having a son go into the church or a daughter go and become a nun, and they would be worked like horses when they were young. They got up every day at 6 o'clock, and they learned how to sing, of course, and they learned how to play the cello and the flute and the trumpet, and they were made to exercise, and they took a lot of care with them because they were delicate. I think that when you had that operation, you weren't terribly hardy. So the only vacation that they were allowed was in the autumn. For a few hours of one day, they were allowed to rise a little later. Otherwise, they were up every day and learning, and then they were expected to sing a great deal of the time. And those castratos grow up. And Scarlatti made the friendship of one in particular, a man named Farinelli. And there was a very good movie made about him recently. And if you're interested in this subject, see it, because the singing is very beautiful. And today, they don't have real castratos, but what they do is mix the voices on the soundtrack between a woman and a countertenor, and then you get that very high, pure quality. Let's listen now to a little bit of an aria written by Farinelli's brother, Broschi, who was a composer and did compose a lot of things for his brother. Here it is. So that was just a little portion of an aria written by Farinelli's brother, Riccardo Broschi, and it was sung by Eva Malas Godlewska and Derek Lee Ragan as a countertenor, backed up by Les Talents Lyriques, conducted by Christophe Rousset. The whole point of this kind of music, of course, is the ornamentation. You've got to have good substance underneath. You've got to have a fairly decent melody. But really what interests the ear is the ornamentation. And there's a whole enormous school, Wanda Landowska, who was a famous harpsichordist from the period 1930 up till the 60s. She's written a very interesting book where she breaks down what exactly happens with each ornament sign. And here's a cute little quote from Gluck. He says, "A misplaced appoggiatura, trill or roulade, will destroy the entire effect of a scene." So what he's saying is, if you put too much ornamentation, it's like too much powder, too much rouge, too much mascara, and the whole thing will sort of implode. And it all really is incredibly important to how you embellish the music, because the music that the composer leaves for us doesn't have those little symbols. And pianists who sometimes come over for dinner when we entertain, they'll bring their music and they'll ask me to help them. How should they trill from above or should they trill from below? And all of this really boils down to, it's your signature. You almost can't make an error unless you put a trill or a mordant on every note. Usually what happens is that the longer notes, like the quarter notes or the half notes, they get to be trilled. And the reason for that is because the harpsichord was always decaying. After you play the note, it starts to die. The reason for the ornamentation is to make it sing in the same way that a bird never sings a straight note. Birds always trill naturally. And the Baroque composers realized that if they were going to keep the sound alive, they had to trill it. And then they got the better idea of also adding all these other things. A mordant is just a trill, but it comes from above. If this is your trill, a mordant, you add another note. Or if it's an upside-down mordant, you come from below. Or a turn, that's from above or below. And then there are slides, and you slide down. And then, of course, the biggest, fanciest one of all is the arpeggio, and that comes usually at the end of the piece, where you go. And sometimes you can really pile it on. You can arpeggiate and you can trill. It depends how florid a type you are. And when you look at Bach's music, almost every long note has some kind of an ornament on top of it. And that's because the note would just die away if you didn't ornament it, because it was the keyboards of those days were very feeble. Let's listen to a beautiful rendition. This is on a modern piano played by Christian Zacharias of a Domenico Scarlatti sonata in E major that has a lot of this kind of ornamentation in it. So that was a little E major sonata by Domenico Scarlatti, played by Christian Zacharias, and it had some of that ornamentation that I was talking about. And if you think of the way the king and queen lived, and they didn't like to live in Madrid, they liked to live on the outskirts at this beautiful big palace that had live birds, peacocks strutting about, and they would put incredible gems into the sockets of the statues so that everything was very, very, very ornate. And the name of that palace is called La Granja, and you can go and visit it. If you go to the big Escorial Palace where Queen Isabella got money to bankroll Christopher Columbus, then when you're out that way, go to La Granja and you'll just imagine the way Scarlatti would have just strutted around, and he would probably have been given lots of time to compose during the day and beautiful instruments. And no wonder he wrote 545 sonatas. He probably could just sort of concentrate on doing that. He didn't have to produce any music for the church or operas. He just focused on this body of these small sonatas, and it became a real intellectual achievement. Now here's another one, also in E major, and also played by the same pianist, but it has a different kind of mood quality, I think. So you could hear those incredibly rapid notes that he was playing. Like little pussy paws. You got to keep your mind on the ball when you're playing that. So Scarlatti would probably have written that for himself or for other virtuosos to play. Here's another one, played by the same pianist. That one had all the fast repeated notes, and this one now has sort of arabesques, almost like little chords going back and forth, and it's very sunny. That was Christian Zacharias playing the Scarlatti Sonata. And we're going to end the program with a little bit of vocal music by our friend Domenico Scarlatti. And I want you to listen to the strings. It's almost called straight sound because there's no vibrato. And what they do is bear down on the bow. And early music or Baroque string players sometimes choke up on the bow to get that effect. They don't just leave their hand down at the frog. They'll reach and put their hand up closer to the middle of the bow so that they can press and get that very straight sound. And the singers, when the singer wants to be very florid and trills a lot, then it sounds better if the string players who are playing along don't do that because it would be too much. So the string players sort of go in for a plain sound that allows the singer to ornament and be very florid. So that was Luce Umicide, or translated means murderous glances. It was an aria from Dopo lungo servire, after long service, by Scarlatti, sung by Kai Wessel, who was a male alto, and accompanied by Musica Alta Ripa. Well, I hope you've enjoyed the program today. You know a little bit more about the Scarlatti family. Our engineer is Jane Pippick. Our producer is Alan McClellan, and I'm Virginia Eskin. A Note to You is made possible by the friends and alumni of Northeastern University, and it's produced by Northeastern University in cooperation with WGBH Radio, Boston.